Topbed Talk.
Feras Hatib. Feras is the Vice President for Research and Development at Edwards Lifesciences in the critical care section. And you've been centrally involved in the development of a technology which is underpinned by artificial intelligence. Feras, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you all for being here. I'm going to show you a practical example of applying machine learning algorithms in real clinical practice. So my talk today is going to be about preventing hemodynamic instability using predictive monitoring that is based on artificial intelligence. So my conflicts of interest are obvious. I am with Edwards Lifesciences, where I am Vice President of Research and Development. And within Research and Development, I lead the algorithms and the signal processing division. So what you're going to see in a little bit was developed by different teams in my organization. First, hemodynamic instability. What is hemodynamic instability? So as the word refers it consists of two Greek words, basically. Hemo comes from the Greek word for blood, and dynamic comes from the Greek word dynamis, which is used to denote power, force, or motion. So simply speaking, hemodynamic instability is a physiological condition where flow to the local organs is inadequate to meet their oxygen demand. So this is the simplest and the most accurate definition of hemodynamic instability. I know there is a lot of ambiguity in the literature about the definition of hemodynamic instability, but that ambiguity only exists because people use surrogate parameters to describe it, secondary parameters to describe it. So hemodynamic instability is not about what your blood pressure is or what your cardiac output is. Hemodynamic instability is simply the blood flow to the local organs is not adequate to meet their oxygen demand. That's it. It could happen at any map level, at any cardiac level. So these two videos were recorded using a microcirculation camera on an animal, on a pig, porcine model. Left side on your left shows a hemodynamically stable condition. So this is at baseline. You could see the flow to this organ. This is the intestine. The flow to this organ is uniform, it's steady, and the tissue in this video well perfused. The one on the right side is the same tissue taken sometimes later. So this was recorded sometimes later after we withdraw some amount of blood from the animal, right? And you could see that the flow is not uniform anymore. It's significantly disrupted. In some areas, it goes backwards. And not all areas of this tissue are perfused anymore. You could see that the density of the vessels decreased significantly. And if you look at the vital signs and the hemodynamic parameters that are available by the bedside, this condition is not detected, right? Those parameters don't tell you that this is happening. So this is exactly what we are trying to detect with machine learning. This is exactly what we're trying to detect with advanced algorithms and with artificial intelligence. And I'll show you how. So this is the microcirculation level. I'm going to go one level up. We know from basic physiology that local organs, local tissues, regulate their flow based on their oxygen demand, which is based on the metabolic rate. They do that by adjusting the local resistances of local small vessels and arterioles to flow. And that happens by basically increasing or decreasing the effective diameter of those small vessels to flow, right? So let's say if in a given organ or in a given tissue, the metabolic rate increases, so for example, as a result of the surgery, of the stress, of the medication, whatever, if a metabolic rate increases, oxygen demand will increase. That will be sensed by the endothelium, which will cause a local vasodilation. The diameter of the vessels increase and the flow to this organ increases. And vice versa. If the metabolic rate decreases, there will be a local vasoconstriction and the flow to this organ decreases. So remember, cardiac output is not regulated centrally, right? Cardiac output, there are no central control mechanisms that can regulate cardiac output. Whether cardiac output increases or decreases, that's all due to the local organ flow regulation. Now, this local flow regulation or this local autoregulation can only happen if the perfusion pressure is adequate. If the perfusion pressure is not adequate, this local autoregulation doesn't work. And as a result of that, the organ, the flow to that organ could be impacted, and the organ may be underperfused, which can lead to complications later. The pressure, basically, especially for those organs that have autoregulatory mechanisms, the lower limit of autoregulation, that's your minimum pressure that this organ must be maintained. So that's your definition of hypotension. It's not MAP of 60, it's not MAP of 65, it's this, right? This could be very low, could be very high. It could be different from patient to patient, and not only that, but it could change within the patient monitoring time. Because at the beginning, this pressure could be one thing. At the end of the surgery, after 10 hours, for example, this could be completely different. And again, this could vary in a wide range. We've seen the literature, the autoregulation literature, even for cerebral autoregulation in the ICU, sometimes that lower limit of autoregulation could be in the 90s, right? Could be low as well. But anyway, the issue is that we don't monitor perfusion pressure at the bedside. It's not available, we cannot access it, right? But the good news is that we all know, again, from physiology, that mean arterial pressure is the driving force behind all the perfusion pressures to the local organs. And mean arterial pressure is what is regulated centrally. So unlike cardiac output, mean arterial pressure is regulated. The baroreceptors all over the cardiovascular system, we have baroreflex sensitivity, and we have several central control mechanisms that maintain MAP stable and adequate to guarantee the local perfusion of the local organs. So what does those central control mechanisms, what do they create hemodynamically? So what they create is a counterbalance between three core physiological mechanisms, which are preload, afterload, and contractility. So these three physiological mechanisms counterbalance each other to maintain mean arterial pressure stable and adequate. And they counterbalance each other on every single cardiac cycle, spontaneously, right? So that's how MAP is maintained stable. So, for example, if preload slightly decreases, afterload and contractility slightly increases, and that would maintain MAP stable. So because of this counterbalance between these three core physiological mechanisms, there exist interactions, physiological links and dynamic links between all the hemodynamic parameters that are related to the core hemodynamic algorithms. And those interactions are multidimensional, they are very complex, and they are nonlinear by nature. So for example, there will be an interaction between heart rate, cardiac output, blood pressure, and respiratory rate. And because of that interaction, there will be those dynamic links. And all that is caused by the existence of those compensatory mechanisms or central control mechanisms. So moving towards the technology, this is exactly what we are trying to detect. We're trying to use a machine learning model that could learn all these complex interactions from large data sets. And the machine learning is a very, very nice mathematical tool that can quantify multidimensional processes, that could quantify those interactions. So what we're trying to do with these algorithms is to detect alterations in those compensatory mechanisms, in those central control mechanisms that could lead us to conditions where local autoregulation, local flow is impacted by the low blood pressure. So we do that out of the arterial pressure waveform. We could do that either invasively with an arterial line, or non-invasively with our ClearSight sensor with a small cuff around the finger. We get a high-resolution arterial pressure waveform. We analyze that in real time on every cardiac cycle, and depending on where we measure in the cardiac cycles, we could extract features related to contractility, to afterload, and to preload, and we could extract a large number of features, and then we could analyze through different techniques their interaction effects, and we could detect when those interactions are disrupted, right? Because when patient is approaching instability, the complexity of those interactions tend to decrease. So things tend to become simpler just before the patient can crash. So to do that, as the previous speaker mentioned, we need a label, we need a definition, we need to define what is hypotension, what is an adequate map. And in the ideal world, that will be the mean arterial pressure that is causing an adequate perfusion. That's the exact definition. It's not map 65. It's not map 55. It's whatever map is causing this. The issue is that, of course, we don't have the perfusion information on the bedside. We don't have that information in data sets. What we have is only map or similar parameters. So instead of using the local perfusion as a label for our data, we used hypoperfusion-related adverse clinical outcomes, such as AKI and myocardial injury. So we just assumed that in those patients who had those conditions, maybe the local hypoperfusion was disrupted. So maybe they had real hypotension. So this is a data set from Dr. Sessler's group. They did tens of thousands of patients, and they showed the graphs that he mentioned this morning, showing MAP related to hypoperfusion-related adverse clinical events. We trained with the data. We didn't train with data of the hypotension itself, of the hypotension period itself. We trained with data before that. So both the negative class and the positive class had similar blood pressure range, but some were hypotensive, some were not. We do that on every cardiac cycle. So we trained with 133 million cardiac cycles out of 1,300 patients. Some cardiac cycles were followed by hypotension, some cardiac cycles were not. With those interaction effects, as I mentioned, we had 2.6 million features. So million features that represent different interactions, because we don't know what feature is predictive for hypotension. Out of those 2.6 million features, and on those 133 million cardiac cycles, the model learned 23 features. And all the features were combinatorial features, meaning all the features in the model capture interactions effect. So they capture the effect of control mechanisms, and they learn how those interactive features change when the patient approaches hypotension. So that's what it learned. It didn't learn mean arterial pressure. It learned mostly hemodynamic interactive parameters. We used a simple logistic regression at the end to develop our model. Now the technology is implemented on a monitor, right? It works with invasive and non-invasive sensors. The monitor, in addition to HPI, to the index, has other parameters that help you understand what is causing the hypotension. Is it a preload, is it an afterload, or is it a contractility? So we have all these other parameters. I'm going to go fast through here. Even the latest version of our technology also gives you automatically what is causing hypotension. So in this case here, it shows, what does it show? Afterload, for example. So a vasopressor might be useful for this patient. Again, all kinds of secondary screens to help you identify what is causing hypotension. The algorithm validation. First we looked, does the algorithm actually detect disrupted microcirculation, disrupted perfusion to the organ? So we have this paper from Simon Davis and Monty Mythen, done on animal models, of course, with a microcirculation camera. So what they showed, they compared HPI, so the index, compared it to the microcirculation score. And the microcirculation score is just an index that quantifies the density of the microvessels in a tissue. So as the density decreases, in this case caused with bleeding, the score goes low, and you could see the HPI goes on the other direction. And it detects that microcirculation alterations very early, as you could see. More work is being done in this area, and you'll see more papers in the future validating HPI in respect to autoregulation, local autoregulation. This another paper also shows, also on animal models, and also shows hemodynamic instability caused by negative inotropy. And again, it shows HPI, detecting that instability very, very early. In patients, HPI has been heavily validated for many, many years. Different patients, different surgeries, OR, ICU, different studies. different statistical approaches, different selection of the data, etc. So all the papers, unfortunately, the clinical papers, the clinical validation, they had to use mean arterial pressure as a reference. So they used mean arterial pressure of 65. And even with that, you could see that most of the papers show a very, very high area under the curve in the mid-90s, 0.9, with sensitivities and specificities in the mid-80s. Recently, some publications have suggested that why do you need to use a complex algorithm like an HPI? You could simply use mean arterial pressure. And again, these are not real studies. These are just opinions and letters to the editors. But perhaps, I mean, if you set your map high, your threshold high, probably map is not going to go low. But then what are you treating, right? So that's another story. But I will show you here that that's not true for what they're saying. So this is the relationship between HPI and MAP. And you could see, of course, physiologically, there is a relationship on average, right? When HPI is high, MAP tends to be low and vice versa. You have to have that. But you could see at the patient level that this is quite spread, that at the patient level, this relationship does not exist. And these are 2,000 patients here, both OR and ICU. You could see in those 2,000 patients when mean arterial pressure, let's say, was around 70, HPI could be as low as 20, which means that hypotension is less likely to occur when it's low. Or it could be as high as 99, where it tells you hypotension is going to happen in 5 minutes. So you could see that they're pretty dependent parameters. Not only that, but if we plot two different patients, you could see that this relationship is different for these two patients. So it's pressure is patient dependent. And this is because the lower limit of autoregulation for each patient could be very different, depending on the conditions. Also published in this paper recently. Examples. So on the right, on the left, your left, is a patient that had a hypotension, as defined by map of 65 here. The x-axis is in minutes. So you could see that HPI predicted that hypotension to happen about 17 minutes in advance. And then here is a patient that never had hypotension, and this is about 40 minutes of monitoring, and hypotension didn't happen, and HPI was low, around 40%. And what you could see here is that the patient with the non-hypotension had actually lower blood pressure than the patient who had hypotension later. So you could see here the value of HPI, another value where this patient almost crashed, right? The map drops in the 50s. HPI, I think, predicted it like 12 minutes in advance. And again, a patient with a similar mean arterial pressure and quite a bit of time where hypotension didn't happen and HPI was low. These are just patient examples to show you the clinical applicability. Clinical impact, again, what matters is not how much HPI is accurate, but does it work clinically, right? This is the first study out of Germany, and they showed that they practically eliminate HPI, they practically eliminated hypotension in the HPI group in these patients. Another study here published in JAMA, they were able to reduce hypotension by 4 times, 4-folds, reducing of hypotension without causing hypertension and without giving more vasopressors. Actually, I think this was the study where they gave actually less vasopressors in the HPI group. This is another study from a Greek group. Again, they also showed they reduced hypotension by 3-folds. Another study, so there are 2 very early small studies that kind of show initial data of outcomes improvements using biomarkers, for example. This is a study from Italy. This is another study from Spain where they showed post-operative complications were removed and they were able to reduce length of stay. Again, small studies, but this is like initial, data that would show that at some point probably we could show if improvements in outcome as well. We as a company, we are also now targeting what we call real-life studies. So we just give the technology to clinicians and they use it clinically in their daily practice, And they compare, after a month, they compare the data from to the data before that. So, for example, this is the data from MPOG data, basically MPOG sites, 11 US hospitals where the technology was implemented. And what they showed is a 57% reduction of hypotension compared to what they had before. This is published on the FDA website. So the FDA cleared this study and allowed us to use these claims, this claim with clinicians. It's being published. I believe it's going to be published soon. Right, Monty? Okay. This is another very interesting study as well. This is in the ICU, 1,461 patients, 3 hospitals in the US. Again, this is also real-life examples, before and after. So they were able to decrease mean ICU length of stay by 11 hours, 57% reduction in prolonged ventilation, and decrease in post-operative renal failure in 3 centers. This was presented as an abstract last year, and the authors are trying to publish it right now. I think it's under review. This is quite impactful, right? What I did not show here is another study, which, because my slides are a few weeks old, just published, what we call HyProtect study. I think it was 12 sites, 5 European countries, also this type of registry study, and they were able to reduce hypotension by how much, Monty? I don't remember. With significantly, right? And reducing it even lower, so their hypotension duration and level was lower than any of the other published studies that already reduced hypotension. This is it. If you guys have questions, we could, I guess, discuss later. Thank you for your attention.
Top Med Talk. Thanks for downloading Top Med Talk. Don't forget to subscribe via your podcatcher. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And also, don't forget, Top Med Talk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, evidence-based perioperative medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. If you check out ebpom.org, you can find low prices on some of the conferences we're organising around the world. Many of them are virtual and don't even involve you leaving your own home. Check out ebpom.org now.